Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. It's George Gill. I'm here with my colleague Gustavo Martinez. We're about 2 months, a little over 2 months into the coronavirus pandemic. We kind of shifted our entire operations and switched the way that we operate about mid-March. And now we are a couple of months past that and things are starting to reopen and we're kind of starting to get back to some normalcy. And it's been over a month that we actually put one of these podcasts out. I think the last one that we did was the one where we...
On the Zoom call.
On the Zoom call, yeah. We were at home. It's when the quarantine initially started. And we talked about what some of the economists and housing experts' predictions were in terms of what this pandemic meant for housing and the economy as a whole.
Right.
And we kind of planted some seeds in terms of what we thought we were going to be experiencing given some of the data that was coming out at that time. So I think maybe what we can do with this episode is visit that once again and see how the data has changed since then. Has the data rung true? Has things changed? Have things changed in terms of what we were predicting before? And also maybe start with your experience in the last couple of months, because I know that you've been pretty busy with your clients and you've been out showing a lot of property in the last couple of months. So why don't you share with us what you've been doing and what you've actually been seeing out there in terms of how this has affected us?
So this is a brag episode then, right? We're going to talk about how we were right
well,
back
only
then.
If you actually call it a brag episode. So I guess, yeah.
I mean, all I'm saying, it's on video. You guys can literally go back to two and a half months ago when we put up that episode, and we said that there wasn't really much to...
That's what you're bragging about.
Yes,
That's
yes, I'm just saying.
Wow, man.
I don't know what university or I don't know
Way
what
to
company needs to
alienate
hire
everyone.
me. Somebody needs to hire me. I'm just a genius. I mean, well, I've been busy. You know, the last 45 days or 60 days. I mean, I don't even know how to like segue into it. But so let's just go for it.
Yeah, I guess keep going now. Hope nobody heard that.
I've been busy. So the last 45, 60 days, I've been out showing properties a lot. I actually had a few listings out of it as well. And something that, I don't even know if I spoke to you about it or not, but when I first so I had 2 listings come on the market, right? At the beginning of all this. Or 2 people reached out to me about wanting to sell the house. And I'm not going to lie, I was one of those people that actually told the seller to maybe hold off for a week to see how things were going to work out, what was going to happen. Because there was too many unknowns at the time, and to list the property and lose those first 2 weeks of like exposure at first, I felt like it wasn't worth the risk. So after 2 weeks, I realized that we should have listed it, but obviously you never know for sure. So we listed it after that, and it actually both properties sold fairly quickly. Now that's just from the listing side. From buyers, I have so many buyers like that are looking for properties that want to take advantage of low interest rates and that are really just looking to make a move, not because they have to, but because they really want to take advantage of it. So I feel like that's the difference. A seller is going to sell it like in this market, or actually a month ago, maybe not so much right now. A seller was going to sell out of necessity. Mm-hmm. A buyer is choosing to buy right now, mm-hmm. which is what's turning this into a seller's market.
Right.
And that's where the lack of inventory, I feel, is coming from, that kind of mindset.
Yeah, we like we were talking about before we started, there was a shortage of inventory going into this. So now you add to that the fact that at the beginning, a lot of sellers took their listing off the market because there was a lot of uncertainty and there was speculation as to what this actually meant for real estate.
And they didn't want people coming into the property.
And they didn't want people coming to the property. And even so right now, I think that's one of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of inventory is that the sellers are much more apprehensive about having people come into their homes. Whereas you mentioned, buyers can take some precautions and whatnot, but it's not anyone coming into their homes.
Right, they're there for 5-10 minutes and they leave.
Right. So yeah, the shortage of inventory has been an interesting
trend.
Interesting trade-off with, I shouldn't say trade-off, but an interesting mirror of the fact that we have low interest rates driving a huge number of people into the market, a huge number of buyers into the market. So it even though sellers might be cautious right now, as you mentioned, it is a seller's market. It's actually playing very favorably for them. But I guess one of the interesting things of how this played out, not so much about, well, I guess it is somewhat related, but the fact that economists and housing experts at the beginning were saying that this is merely a lull. We have a very, very healthy economy that's been interrupted by an external factor, an external health crisis. This is not economically driven. This is unlike the Great Recession and even going back to the Great Depression, where essentially the various economic flaws in both of those cases imploded and took everything down with it. In this case, we have healthy economy being interrupted by something externally. And so there were a lot of signs that were pointing to this not only being temporary once the housing crisis was resolved, once the health crisis was resolved, I should say, but also the fact that we were just much better positioned as an economy and as a housing market for us to actually sustain what was coming, because
Extremely better position.
right. I mean, housing was in a better position in terms of the amount of equity that existed.
That to me was the biggest factor, I think.
Right. I mean, you take a look at the 2008 housing bubble, and if you were to fluctuate the housing market in any direction, and people were very sensitive to any fluctuations because they were pretty much at the brim with what they could afford, what their payments were as a percentage of their income. And so any fluctuation in the wrong direction put them in very problematic territory. Whereas now, as a whole, the housing market can sustain those fluctuations. If in fact this health crisis led to some housing market adjustment, the housing market could have affected it.
Afford it, right?
Not only because of the equity that exists, but because of the fact that the mortgage payment as a percentage of their income is much lower as it compares to 2008. So for a variety of reasons, they were calling for this to be temporary. And at the same time, I think that what helped a lot was the fact that there was a lot of information being thrown into the marketplace by agents, by economists, by housing experts. And I'm not sure what the impression may have been from the marketplace itself, but from our standpoint, we're part of a lot of community forums and a lot of blogs and a lot of groups where we saw a lot of people actually talking with each other and to their clients about why this isn't 2008, why this is not going to be a housing crisis. Here's the data. Here's the information that we're gathering from experts. Right.
It was never opinion.
Right. There was a lot of facts and very favorable data being thrown into that I think did more to clarify what was happening as opposed to what was that? Clarify instead of terrify. So because there was a lot of ominous information, a lot of ominous data. I mean, you take a look at unemployment numbers and they were sky high. They were much higher than 2008. They were mirroring the Great Depression. I mean, when you look at that at its surface, at face value, how could you not panic?
Right. But then you start actually digging a little bit and you notice where those numbers are actually coming from. I mean, you have restaurants that are closing their doors temporarily.
Right.
Temporarily. and that was the biggest portion of unemployment.
Right.
So all these people are likely to go back to work, and that's the difference. But people were just looking at the big picture. They weren't actually digging a little bit further to actually figure out what was really happening. And that was the biggest difference maker.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you actually, we were talking about this before we started. I don't know if you touched up on it while we've been actually recording, but you mentioned that you haven't really seen, at least with your clients, the fear that may, I would say, cause any significant effect in whether we are staying busy or whether we're seeing a drop off in any activity. So, I mean, obviously we're taking some precautions and we've adjusted in a lot of ways, but you, in terms of your buyers, you haven't seen any hesitation or any holdback in that sense? So
no real fear. No real fear. I did have a couple clients that decided to pull back on a purchase, but not out of fear, but because they thought there was a better opportunity coming up.
Right.
Which is understandable as well, but never fear. None of my clients were actually fearful.
So in a time when things are going very well, not just in the housing market, but in the economy as a whole, and you have people start to pull back, I mean, you can argue that it's really based on speculation. It's really based on uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but the fact that it's uncertain and the fact that they don't know
is the fear itself.
Is what actually drives them to pull away and say, you know what? Sure, I'm in a position to buy right now and I want to buy right now, but I don't know what's going to happen in a couple of months. Let me back up a little bit. Same thing for the sellers. And so I think that one of the things that really, really rang true and has helped us a lot is the fact that confidence has slowly started to return. And as you said, when people start to understand, okay, well, it's not a matter of downplaying the pandemic or a matter of downplaying the severity of the health crisis. It's a matter of understanding what it means for the housing market.
Right, clarifying the data.
Right. And so once they started to understand that, and that's why I was mentioning earlier, the fact that there was data being thrown into the marketplace, there was information and opinions backed by facts, backed by information. I think that put some ease into the marketplace enough that people were saying, okay, well, maybe we can proceed with the proper precaution. Maybe we can continue because it looks as though this isn't going to affect the housing market as we thought it could, as we thought worst case scenario could be. And so for those reasons, I think that we have seen a very quick rebound relatively in the amount of activity both on the buyer side and maybe not on the seller side, but at least we're seeing sellers more willing to work with buyers. And
Right.
as you've mentioned, you have a lot of buyers that are entering the marketplace once again.
So on the economic update yesterday that we watched specific for Connecticut, something really interesting that stood out to me was the fact that people today have 100% more savings than they did when this whole thing began.
Oh yeah, 100%.
150% more
Interesting.
savings because they're not going out because obviously they can't. They're not really purchasing a lot of things. They're not spending a lot of money, and also unemployment is for a lot of people is actually more than what their actual income is. So now you have that's why the demand is so high for properties, because now you got people with more money that can afford a down payment and want to take advantage of these interest rates and stuff like that. So it's just so many things happening, so many different variables happening that is causing this to be such a huge seller's market, and sellers are not taking advantage of it.
Yeah,
which kind of sucks.
Interesting point you made, because we've seen it ourselves in our office. I wrote about this in last month's newsletter that part of our business is property management, and we that's a monthly revenue stream for us. And so when it first started, we were very worried about, okay, well, if everyone's going to lose their jobs, they're not going to be able to pay their rent. Now we have
disaster.
Now, not only do we have people taking their houses off the market and buyers not looking, but we also have our management branch that is now not producing any rent roll,
Right.
and we're not able to charge our management fees. We're not able to pay our property owners' expenses. So what is this going to mean for us, really? And the interesting thing that happened is that we did see a decline in our rent paid in April, but by a very, very minimal amount. I would say that I don't remember we're normally between 80 and 85% of entire rent roll paid on a monthly basis. And then in April, we were at the end of the month, we were close to 77%,
So
which
3% difference.
3 to 8% stretch, 3 to 8% range.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, when you take a look at the unemployment numbers and what was, what we were seeing out there, the fact that we only declined by 3 to 8% in our rent roll
Goes to show
was
you
a
how
massive
broad that
win.
data is.
It was, well, sure, yeah. But I think it also speaks true to the fact that maybe some people were being really smart with the money that they were saving or receiving. Because interestingly enough, not only did we see a very minimal interruption in our rent roll in April, but we also saw a lot of people that were previously behind on rent catch up completely in their rent, which meant that either they were putting the money that they weren't spending anymore towards
Exactly.
rent, or their stimulus money was being put towards rent, or the unemployment bonuses were being put towards rent. But so people were I think it comes back to a lot of hard lessons were learned 10 years ago, and not only for consumers but for the government as well, because I would say that when you compare it to 2008, the government, I think, acted a lot quicker than they've acted in previous instances, and I think that helped a lot, regardless of what's playing out right now. I think that the fact that very, very quickly stimulus payments were sent out and unemployment bonuses were sent out, and the unemployment pool was broadened to include people that previously weren't included. There were a lot of things that were taken very quickly to try to mitigate any potential negative effect from this pandemic. And
Right.
I think that, combined with the fact that consumers also learned their lessons, they're now being smart with their money that they're getting as well. And so to your point, and kind of backing up what I mentioned about the rent roll, I think that a lot of people are doing their part in making sure that they not only come out of this in a good light, but they position themselves better to ride this out. So I think that says a lot about how the information and data that people are receiving has played a role in downplaying people's fears and like we said earlier, clarifying instead of terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote down some things which actually we pretty much touched up
we
on
haven't
all
even
of it.
started yet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we pretty much touched up on all of it. And actually, now that I think about it, maybe I don't want to get into the specifics in terms of percentages and whatnot, because I think that we did
It's the
a
idea
pretty good
behind
job
it. Yeah.
behind kind of giving a broad image and a broad idea of what's happened. But the main points that I had mentioned was that I wanted to kind of highlight the differences, which was what caused this compared to 2008. The unemployment numbers, the fact that they're super, super high right now.
But steadily coming down.
Each week the numbers are coming
less
down.
Filings.
Yeah, that's
the amount
true.
of equity.
The amount of equity. So
what is
I
it? Like
wrote about
53% of people have at least 60% equity on their property, or something like that. 50 something, like low 50s.
Yeah,
have
58
at least 60% equity, right?
Right,
Which is
and
insane.
about 40% actually own their properties free and clear. So that's actually a very
That's so
important number to
huge.
consider.
That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So the couple of things that I mentioned was that the causes are much different. The unemployment numbers, even though the numbers from 2008 pale in comparison to the numbers that we're seeing now, they actually mirror more the Great Depression numbers.
Right.
The fact that the vast majority, the fact that
I believe
at least over
90% of people.
two-thirds of 90% of people are considered temporary layoffs.
Correct.
And then 2/3 of those people that have filed unemployment are in the restaurant and serving industry, which, as we've said, once things start to open up, it's safe to assume that these people are going to be, the vast majority of them are going to be rehired.
Which is already happening right now.
Which is happening right now. So there's huge differences in terms of the unemployment numbers. So it's important to not take them at face value and just say, what we're at 15%, 35 plus million people unemployed. That doesn't even compare to 2010. Like, how are we not in a bad situation right now? Well, let's actually analyze those numbers.
What
and
about the
understand
85% of people that are still employed, though?
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot going, and I mentioned housing as well in terms of why we think it's fared better. Because actually, one of the interesting things, and this is the topic of this month's newsletter, is that when this pandemic started, 50.6%, there was a 50.6% drop in buyer activity as it compared to January 1st in 2020. Now, we don't need to remind people that January 1st is the dead of winter when there's no activity. So the fact that we had 50% less activity than we did in January 1st was a pretty ominous sign. But then we see that as of May 6th, we returned to January 1st, 2020 levels. And now, as of today, actually, I just pulled this from the website, we're actually 37% above January 1st levels and 27.5% higher than we were this time last year, which is actually pretty interesting. Yeah, so it just goes to show that we had one of the biggest drop-offs in late March, early April that we've seen in recent history, in recent memory, and the quickest comeback, and like I said, for all the reasons that we've actually discussed. So
I hate to make this a sales thing, but honestly, I mean, after hearing all that, and it's not even like I want people to like sell their property or anything like that, but it really is the time to do it. I mean, after all this, I mean, you're hearing that now we're actually 27% increase from this time last year when nothing bad was happening.
Yeah. Yep.
Like the fact that we have almost 30% more showings now, but what, half the inventory?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Possibly the reason why that 27% is that number is because there was a delay in the spring market. And like I said, that's the topic of this newsletter, to kind of put things into perspective.
Now.
Yeah, it's kind of putting things into perspective that there was a very significant interruption in our spring market. And now that we are starting to see some improvement and businesses are reopening, and we've had 2 or 3 months of quarantine and people doing their part in trying to mitigate the spread, now we're seeing people starting to come out, get back into the marketplace, and probably what we're going to be seeing is fewer vacations. The reason why the summer is usually slow is because end of June, when school got out, is when people started to plan their vacations, their trips, their getaways, and so real estate activity kind of stopped. So not only are they going to
be here, but they also have more savings now too. Right.
So there's a lot of positive to be hopeful about, and to kind of take with you in the sense that even though the numbers may still be pretty ominous right now, there's
moving in the right direction.
At the core of that, there's reason behind why things are moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Good.
Awesome. All right, cool. So I guess quick good recap of what we've been seeing in the last couple of months. You gave us a quick recap of what you have been doing yourself. So in the next coming weeks, I mean, obviously, if there's any change or if there is any new information that we can pass along, we'll do that, and we'll make another episode out of it.
Beautiful.
All right. But until then, we'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Bye.